All right, really
having a good
high
show.
energy.
So it's us between SharePoint, right? No, so there's free drinks and then SharePoint. So, but technically we can go on until tomorrow morning at 8.
Right, and in
So-
the interest of health, we should probably extend this so that people drink less tonight.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So we'll be done by 10 p.m. So welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kimmo Forss. I'm a cloud architect, whatever that means. So focusing on Office 365, been doing that for 5 years now. I was working 2 years as part of the SharePoint Online dedicated product team. My area was in the area of sort of a customization reviews. So for those of you who have your customers on the dedicated platform and have cursed about our code assessment frameworks and whatnot, mea culpa. So I'm to blame there.
Yeah, and I'm James Petrosky. I'm with MCS North America. I've been in the solution architect role for 3 years. Before that, I was a delivery architect. Solution architect basically means I write pre-sales estimates, do TQAs, do presentations, do a lot of customer planning up front before we do an actual big migration or a big upgrade or a big delivery, and then do TQA checkpoints along the way. So kind of walked from individual consultant through the first part of my career to now I'm actually selling a lot of this stuff. So I'm seeing a lot of the smoke and mirrors and a lot of things behind the scenes. So hopefully I can shed some light on that today.
Do we have a clicker?
I do not have a clicker. I think they charged extra for
Okay.
that.
So anyway, so the agenda for this 5-hour session we'll cover these 4 topics. So we'll talk about the different upgrade strategies because, again, depending on where in your SharePoint lifecycle you are, you need to think about how to get to the next version. So we'll talk about different strategies for that. And then the thing that I realized, the older I get, the more interesting I get in kind of people and process things. So what we will do here is explain a process on how to assess your organizational readiness to move to the cloud. Because the reason most projects fail is people and process. It's not technical challenges can almost always be overcome. It's the people and process things that makes projects go over budget and whatnot. So we'll present a framework for kind of assessing your organizational readiness to actually do an upgrade or migration project.
And this framework's come out of about a year of work. And what we're seeing from evolutions of SharePoint, from a project lifecycle standpoint, or a product lifecycle standpoint rather, we're seeing similar situations we saw with XP and Exchange and SQL. So it's not like we have SharePoint 2007 and it's a brand new greenfield for most of our customers, or they're going to migrate from 2003. We've got a lot of customers on 2007.
So how many of you are still on 07?
Yeah. And we've got several on 2010. And to top it off, we have a new fork in the road that we didn't have before, and that's this whole cloud thing, right? So a lot of our sales folks are going to our customers and presenting them with some very attractive deals for 1, 2, 3 year special pricing for the cloud. So it's not just migrating or upgrading to 2013, but it might be a combination of that and some portion of the workload in the cloud. So we're not going to go through deep dive of upgrade to 2013. There's a 2-part series Wednesday morning on that. This is really the framework we've put together, to really assess their organizational readiness, where are they technically, and then to make recommendations from that point.
Which is kind of the third bullet point is, what are the things then in your technical environment that you need to assess? So how to assess your content applications and whatnot. And we'll do a bit of demos on tools and processes, and if all goes well, I'll actually even demo something that I just got freshly compiled. So it's compiled 5 minutes ago, so it should work, right? Compilation is a token of success for most of the developers. Testing is something that only those who have too much time on their schedules do, right?
It's got that new compiled smell.
Yes. So if we think about upgrade strategies, so again, the first question that you should ask is, should we upgrade? Because at the end of the day, there needs to be a business reason for doing the upgrade. So, and sometimes it's been hard to convince our salespeople to understand that customers will not upgrade just because we have a new product out there. So again, should we upgrade? You have to have a business case for upgrading. If you don't have a business case, why would you upgrade? The business case maybe a kind of IT-driven business case where we can be more efficient on the new platform, or it could be more the traditional business case where you get input from business that they can be more productive on the new environment. But in both cases, you need to have a strong case for doing that. Then that follows the second question, can we upgrade? So do we have the skills to upgrade that? Do we have the knowledge of our environment, all of the extensibility points we have in our environment to upgrade them? And then if those two are true, so how should we upgrade? So again, should we upgrade if we're running an older version? Should we upgrade by following the product group recommended guidance, so that going to the next version, to the next version, to the next version, or should we choose a tool-based approach and leapfrog to the latest version? We'll talk about those things. And then at the end of the day, what's the return on investment of doing this? So how much will it cost? And the flip side of that coin, what's the sort of opportunity cost if we don't do this? So what's the potential gain that we would get from a new platform that we don't get today? And so to paraphrase, we should have sound effects here, but the Clash said it the right way. Should I stay or should I go? So you really need to have a clear understanding in a business case if you should do or not.
Yeah, and I'll just add to this. A lot of our customers are working, and some of the larger implementations for sure, are working with strategy partners. So they're putting together a roadmap for their portals or their intranets or the product stack in general. And they'll look at this and say, okay, if we're going to upgrade, is this a chance for us to rationalize farms? You know, we built a lot of farms. They were federated. Can we rationalize down to a smaller number of farms? We've put out a lot of recommendations, and you're seeing that we're updating our recommendations on the solution. So take out the infrastructure side of it, the solution topology in terms of how many web apps, site collections, that kind of thing. Do we take a chance and actually change to that so we're in a good position to go to the cloud at some point? Those are things that come up. And in pre-sales conversations, they often get minimized in terms of the effort that would take, right? Okay, so it's fairly simple. It's an upgrade. You move some things around. It's not that easy. So getting a rough order of magnitude of the cost in terms of the labor to do it, the support for end users after you do it, and the investment all up, what's the return on it? You know, are we doing this so we can be cloud ready in 3 years or 5 years? Is it really worth it at this point for us?
It will be interesting when we come back here, let's say after 10 years to the conference again. Let's see who Steve has to kill by then to get London to go haywire. But anyway, to see like how many of our customers in 10 years' time will still have an on-premises SharePoint. My prediction is not that many, because again, there's typically not much reason to run SharePoint on premises just for the sake of running it on premises. The main reason today, there's two main reasons today. One is, well, we know how to do it, and like we've done it, so we like to have the control. And the other one is that the alternatives or delivery mechanisms don't have the same capabilities as an on-premises environment. But as the cloud progresses, we will most likely get those capabilities in the cloud. So again, the business case for staying on premises for each year should change.
And it's interesting because we're both long-term Microsoft employees, and I do a lot of pre-sales, right? But I have a slightly different take on it and think, you know, from the talks I've had, it's going to be really industry specific. So I work with a lot of different industries, and some of those like government, state and local, financial. I don't see those guys jumping. I mean, I don't know if we have any municipality representatives or anything like that, but I don't see them jumping into the cloud with highly sensitive data right away. I think it's going to take some time to do that. So, if ever, and who knows?
And again, those things tend not to be a technical decision. It's a legal discussion. It's you have to change local regulations and laws in order to be allowed to store sort of PII data outside of your country's borders and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so if you look at the process of sort of upgrades or migrates, I would actually argue that an upgrade is just a migration to the latest version. So to me, those things are like upgrades and migrations are more or less the same thing. So at the end of the day, these are the things that you need to sort of have in place. So again, assessment. So having an inventory of what's in your environment. So that could be like how many web apps, how much content, what type of applications, and all of those things. So having a clear understanding of what you have in your environment, because if you don't have that, how can you predict the cost? How do you know how expensive it'll be to move to the next version? And I already mentioned this, having a business case. like you typically don't upgrade just for the fun of it anymore. Those are large and complex projects.
Yeah, and the business case also usually dictates or influences the success of the upgrade or the migration. So if you've got executive sponsorship, it makes it a lot easier to clear, and you guys know this, to clear obstacles and things that get in the way. If you don't have that, if you're working with within a lower level of an organization or within a lower level of the IT department, and someone's taking this upgrade on as an additional extracurricular activity, that can be really problematic if you run into something quite substantial that you need to go through. So.
And then to sort of sum it up, so again, people and process, again, having the skills, having the know-how, having the resources. So at the end of the day, once you have these, then you need to define what strategy will you have in place, which is kind of the natural segue to the upgrade strategies. So in essence, we have 4 different strategies. So again, the most common one that you see documented in our materials is the one on the top left. So upgrade to the next version. So if you're on 07, you'll upgrade to 2010. If you're in 2010, you'll upgrade to 13, so on and so forth.
If you had Steve's 2001 environment up here, we'd ask you to go through 4 versions of the product, right, to upgrade. Which would
but
be
I don't
amazing,
think we have many customers on 2001 anymore, right?
I've seen some large ones on 03, not
Yes.
01, yeah.
Yeah, 03, yeah, I've seen the same, and then WSS 2.0. But anyway, so again, that's the recommended approach, and then leapfrogging, again, going from 07 to 13 or from 03 to 13. Then the third one, which is quite close to my heart at the moment, is upgrading or migrating to the cloud. So instead of running and keeping your content on premises, you'll just take the site collections and move them to the cloud. And then the fourth one, which we as Microsoft shareholders don't like, is wait. Again, if there's nothing in the new version that you need, why would you upgrade?
And it's still a decision, right? If you choose to wait, you're actually making a decision.
Yes.
I think one thing I would add to this is we're talking all about SharePoint to SharePoint, right? And we use the term upgrade and migration interchangeably. For me, when I think of migration, I'm thinking of some type of API, right? I'm sucking data out of some system, pushing it into another system, as opposed to upgrade where I'm actually going through and making schema changes. So when I look at this framework and everything that we're bringing through, we've applied this to source systems, so original corporate systems that are not SharePoint as well. So if you're looking at doing a notes migration or eRoom or anything like that, a lot of these principles will apply today as well.
So then, well, upgrade or migrate. So again, with upgrade, the good thing, the way that we do upgrades now with the database attached, the benefits, again, you keep the site hierarchies, the templates intact. The content stays exactly as it is. So that could be a bad thing if you wanted to rearrange that. You can't do that on the fly if you're doing the database attached type of route. So it's by far the fastest way because you're attaching content databases and letting SharePoint upgrade the schemas in the database. It's by far the quickest way to get things done.
And I'd put the asterisk there, assuming you're coming from the most recent version prior to this one.
Exactly. So, but even if you're on, let's say, 03, like with virtualization, you can just borrow Steve's laptop and you would have a 07 environment, and 10 you would just do the database attaches in those environments.
Assuming very standardized vanilla content.
Yes. So, and again, this is something, if you have issues with upgrade, you can call product support, because this is the way that we have built the product to be upgraded always from the previous version. So then, but then in reality, quite often my customers do want to do a migration. So instead of doing an upgrade, they're looking at ways to restructure their environment. So their information architecture that they had in place for their 07 environment, or which they did not have in place for their 07 environment, they want to change that. So they want to create a new information architecture for the corporation. So again, with the upgrade approach, you can't really do that easily. And the other one, which is quite common, is sort of a retemplating of sites, because we all know that with site definitions you can do great things, but again, they're painful as hell when doing the upgrades as well. So how many of you have custom site definitions deployed? How many of you would like to keep them? So again, with the upgrade approach, you're sort of stuck. You have to you have to sort of, you're stuck with them. You can't really upgrade away from a sites directory. But well, for the ones that we have in the product, we typically keep all the XMLs and all the supporting infrastructure in place so that you can upgrade and those sites will still work. But for custom site definitions, you need to sort of figure out a plan for that. So again, with a migration approach, if you're targeting and taking only the relevant content, you can actually do a solution where you're creating your new environment to have the look and feel that you want, and then you're just moving content across. Typically, with migrations, the granularity is site collections because, again, we can't really do a content database migration. We'll usually operate at the sort of a largest container level that we can, which is typically the site collection. This requires more effort. It requires tools, but not only tools, you have to have a process because, again, we have great tools out there. If you go out and meet our sponsors, we have a bunch of sponsors that have migration tools. But again, tools alone will not solve the problem. You need to have a process in place to sort of to address this in the right way.
Yeah, and with upgrade, you've got the big red easy button atomic approach, right?
Yes.
You're trying to get a lot of it done, get it done quickly. With migration, you're actually investing a lot more time and being intentional up front. And the hope there is that you'll get an ROI afterward. So if that ROI is rationalizing the farms like I mentioned, or if it's pulling it all together into a single web app for easier manageability, or SharePoint apps if you want to use those, it takes more time up front.
Yes.
And it also has a hidden cost as well because there's no migrate in central admin in SharePoint, right? I've not seen it. If you've seen it, please show it to me. But that last bullet there are sponsors out here you can talk to in about 30 minutes that I've worked with, that my customers have worked with, that do provide tools to do this.
So some of the details, like what are the things that you need to look out for when you're doing the upgrade? And again, we won't go in deep detail because we have upgrade sessions in the conference. To me, like the key things are, again, storage requirements, making sure that you have enough storage. That's kind of a self-evident, but not always. The ones that usually sort of my customers have issues with is the second bullet point. So you have customizations which aren't correctly deployed, or you have other missing files, or you might have broken databases. So you have databases that have orphaned objects in them and things like that. So, and some other things. So when you're doing the upgrade, a good example here is going from 2010 to 2013, search changed quite a lot. So as Neil presented in his session earlier today, again, we have a brand new search platform. So again, how do you plan for your upgrade? So, but I would actually make the argument that search upgrades is typically not that complex in a sense, but usually you have content sources. So most often I find it to be more efficient to just sort of with search, reconfigure the new environment and let then search engine do its work. But again, if your corpus is really, really big and it takes sort of weeks to do a full crawl, then you might consider some alternative approaches.
Yeah, in addition to that, two that I often run into are the change of authentication, right? So a lot of our customers who are moving to 2013 are going to move to claims authentication for various reasons. Many of them in 2010 are still classic. And we've got a slide here where we address that, but that's probably one of the biggest I see where they'll say, okay, we'll follow the best practice and change to claims and then do the upgrade, this week. I think, okay, great, we'll go out for T as well. So that's one, and then patch levels. So they're not up to date, so they may have 2010 and not be patched before they do the upgrade.
Yeah, because all of these you need to factor in your kind of disaster recovery stories. So what if something goes horribly bad whilst you're doing the upgrade? How do you fail over if you suddenly have parts of it already converted to claims, and then you restore an application that's on classic and whatnot? So again, those things are cumbersome to overcome. So, but again, customizations, authentication types, typically the biggest ones. When you're then considering the kind of leapfrogging, again, surprisingly enough, well, you have the same things. Again, storage, that doesn't really change. Customizations, so even if you're moving from an 07 environment or an 03 environment to 2013, you need to have a plan for customizations. To me, one of the biggest areas is actually in the area of branding, because in 2013, the branding model has changed. So we all know that we can deploy 2013 in a mode that we can support our 2010 customizations or our 2010 branding. But again, long term, the customers do not want to stay in the 2010 mode. They usually want to go to 2013 mode. So typically one thing that I've seen as a huge issue for some of my customers is figuring out how do they manage their branding story going from 2010 to 2013. And where it becomes really interesting is if the customers have allowed people to do kind of self-service branding, so allowing them to use SharePoint Designer or whatnot to sort of to take pages and then store the pages in the database, which are then referring to 2010 functionality, and then what happens when you flip from the 2010 bits to the 2013 bits in the cloud. Those handcrafted branding pages typically have funky behaviors. So that's something that, and again, this is as true in the cloud as well, because when we're doing the move from 2010 to 2013, we have the same challenge potentially in the cloud. So, which in a way enforces the need of having a sort of branding governance policy. So how do we allow our end users to brand the environment? So do we allow the usage of things like SharePoint Designer or some of the other web editors?
Yeah, we've highlighted deprecated features as well. So if you're using a feature in 2007 or 2010, and it's true for upgrade as well, that's no longer in 2013, and you've got business processes that are contingent upon that, you've got to figure out how to upgrade. And there's a pull through for that as well. If you're in 2007 and you're doing a leapfrog, and you've brought in a third-party product from an ISV, and they may provide an upgrade path, but what do they do if you leapfrog, right? So if you leapfrog from 2007 to 2013, and their product has been upgraded, right? They have a new version of it. How do you get that to actually work within the new platform? So with the existing older content.
So as part of the SharePoint Online dedicated customization policy, one thing that we check for is the usage of deprecated namespaces in your code components, and we don't allow our customers to deploy something that is using deprecated features. And the reason for that is, even though the deprecated features work in the next version, there's no guarantee that they will work in the subsequent versions onwards.
That's the definition of deprecated.
And kind of the well, not so funny story, but we tell our customers to operate things that way. We did not do it ourselves. So we ended up in a situation where we could not upgrade one of our internal properties, which we use to monitor our customers' environments, because we had a third-party component without an upgrade path.
Yeah, we eat our own dog food, but sometimes we choke on our own dog food.
Yes.
And fall to the floor.
Yeah. So. And also, as we mentioned, so the leapfrogging, so this is typically a much more complex project. So again, there's a much higher load on resources, both hardware-wise, because you're typically running programs and tools, but also on people. So the leapfrog or the migration approach, just be mindful of the fact that if you're going down that road, make sure that you have more resources available than if you're using the traditional upgrade approach.
And as he switches slides, one thing I would add, I know we're short on time, but one thing I would add to that is if you are coming from either a really old version of SharePoint or from something that's non-Microsoft based, you'll want to do a like-for-like feature assessment, right? So if you're coming from one of these other platforms, you'll want to see what features you really need and how they map to SharePoint, and then how that pulls through your content mappings.
So then the upgrade or migrate to the cloud. So again, some of the benefits, you all know the benefits of the cloud in the fact that you don't have to manage the environment. It's someone else's responsibility. So typically you get the business continuity services from the hosting the service provider. Some of the things which are interesting with the cloud is that actually they sometimes introduce dependencies on your on-premises environment that you don't have in the classical mode. So again, we tend to be, especially like if we look at Office 365, we are more stringent on kind of software and patch level requirements on premises than you are if you had your own SharePoint deployment. So like the support of older Office versions, for instance. So in Office 365, you cannot use, if you're on Office 2003, for instance, we don't support Office 2003 against Office 365 platform. So again, if you want to go down that road, so again, there's no Microsoft product for doing migration to the cloud, so it'll require third-party tools, and in cases, manual migrations as well. So again, you can do that. It's of these three categories, this is probably the most complex one, but then, and the most expensive one up front, but then long term, once you have your information in the cloud, you can start to reap the benefits from there.
Yeah, and I'll just say, we have another slide on this, but not all tools approach it the same way in terms of how they do the migration and which APIs they use, if they use CSOM, if they use the web services. So the throughput's a really big deal, which I think might be the next slide. One thing I'll also add here is if you're looking at potentially doing terms some people call hybrid, I think Kimmo calls it connected, some people call it federated, where you have something on premises and something in the cloud. You really need to either take the time to research and make sure the functionality you expect is going to work the way you think it will, or to bring in someone with that expertise. So, I'm really into social computing, and if I were to, set up those two environments, what would my social experience look like between the two? What does search look like? What does authentication look like? It's not as easy as consuming an essay across.
So the next thing we'll talk about is, as you remember in the agenda, we'll talk about the organizational assessment. And what I like to do here is do a demo on a prototype that we're working on in order to sort of assess your organizational readiness. Because the interesting thing with these things is these are more kind of soft skill type of things. So what we've seen is if we send in 3 different architects to do an assessment on a customer environment, you typically get 6 different results. So you get 3 different internal results from each of the architects, and you get 3 different customer-facing reports, which is natural because people have different skill sets. They detect different things in the environments. They sort of pay attention on like some of them pay attention more on change management, some of them pay more attention on software development processes and whatnot. So what we're trying to do is sort of create a framework for doing kind of this organizational readiness assessment that would be consistent across the different environments.
Yeah, and I wish I had the equivalent to Steve and Zoe's napkin drawing, beginning and end.
Yeah.
So when you actually see the app that we're going to show, it's not what it looked like.
Yeah, when I sketched the first prototype, it was very kind of a win form, like click, old VB6 type of look and feel. Luckily, we have people who
He created the best database in the
world.
world off of, I think it's called Excel is the product.
Yes. So this is it's a big font. So this is actually 2 parts. So I won't go in the technical part here, but the gist of the idea is that we have a technical component that we ask the customer to run in their environment and provide the output to us. Reason why we have this is it's not that I don't trust my customers, it's just that they typically don't know what's in their environments. So it's so often where I've had kind of these upgrade discussions and I've asked the customer, so like what type of customizations have you deployed in your environment? And the answer, well, we don't have any. And then you run an assessment, well, what about this? Oh yeah, and what about, oh, I forgot about that. So again, that's why it's like trust and verify. So we have a lightweight kind of technical component that assesses things like number of WSPs, number of zones, authentication zones, whatnot. So just to sort of speed up this, let me just grab one of these XML files. And based on this, we get a really quick sort of a technical, ignore this is not relevant for now, but you will get kind of a technical risk assessment saying that, well, you have large databases or you have large sort of a large number of web applications or whatnot. So the idea here is kind of we'll color code the different type of results and based on that.
Green is good.
But the interesting thing is actually the organizational assessment piece. So this is where I've spent a lot of time in Excel trying to figure out sort of what are the key things that we think are relevant when you're looking at a sort of a upgrade project. So the first one is, again, whenever I had these discussions with our product groups, they always assume that customers have full access to their own environments. In reality, quite often they're hosted by someone else and you don't have access to the environment. So how many of you are managing your own SharePoint environments? How many of you have hosted SharePoint, how many have SharePoint environments that are managed by someone else? So it's a 70-30 mix. So that's what, and again, it makes a huge difference because if you have the control, you can do whatever you want in your environment. If you don't, you have to sort of get the service provider's assistant to do these things. So let's.
Dear Mr. Customer.
Dear Mr. Customer,
That goes,
what is?
Yeah. In-house by a third party. And am I changing the model? No.
So do you like your service provider?
No, but I'm in a contract.
Okay. So the project, is it driven by IT or business?
Business.
Lucky you. You're
The third option.
Yes. I'll do central.
Thank you.
So again, this is a prototype.
Yes, we do have an internal development team working on SharePoint. Yes, we'll be changing the authentication model because you said I had to. We're going to go from classic to claims because you claim it's important.
Yes.
Not sure. So let's say no.
Well, if we, yeah. We should have maybes.
We have
in all of
something
these,
called ping and something called SiteMinder. I don't know if.
Yeah.
Yes. Are there any external application interfacing? Yes, we have some corporate apps that we pull data from.
So most customers would be clueless about this question.
Yeah.
So this is like,
What do
are you merging web applications?
Yes, we'd like to.
So the URLs will change.
The URLs will change.
Indeed.
Are all Office client versions supported by the new version? What does that mean?
So like, do you have Office 2003 versions in place still?
No, I think 2007 is the oldest we have.
So then they are supported. And again, one thing that we want to usually do, these are really, really important in the cloud engagements because the worst thing that can happen in a cloud deployment is suddenly you realize that like out of our 10,000 users, 3,000 are still on like Windows 2000 and Office 2000, and we have to upgrade them before we can resume the project. So that project's business case just went poof.
Yeah, the cost, yep.
So,
Are all the devices accessing SharePoint supported by SharePoint?
so iPads.
We have iPads, Droids, Blackberries,
Blueberries,
muffins, chocolate. This is a word association game, I guess. Are there any custom solutions? Yes.
So any one of you have a SharePoint environment without any customizations deployed?
Just completely out of the box with a lot of content in it.
Really?
Tell him what he's won. A bag. Do you own the IP, the intellectual property for the customization? Some of it's really old.
Yeah. So this is another thing that we usually find out. Whenever customers commission customizations, so usually they're done in a project fashion. So you give the specs, you sort of get proposals from different consulting companies. They come in, they build the stuff, they give you the end results, they leave. But then 3 years later, when you need to upgrade them, so like, do you have the source code to those things? Do you have the specs? Do you know what those things are supposed to do? Quite often we are in situations where like the customer, we'll tell them that they have these WSPs deployed, but they don't know like who owns them, like who has the IP, because if we don't know who owns them, how do we know who will upgrade them? So it's typically a pretty complex thing to solve.
Is the team or the company who created the customizations available? No. Are there any ongoing customization projects? Yes. Branding implementation, yes. That's a question, right?
Yeah.
We are using sandbox solutions, 'cause that's the future. Is the system using workflow-based solutions? Yes.
So as you can see, like these are kind of the 6 categories that we assess. And I'll kind of show you in a short while how this
Be
can
very
extended.
careful with responses here because so many, and you guys probably know this, but so many folks are like, we have extensive hands-on experience. Where's the start settings button?
Yes.
Yeah, so yes, we have extensive. That's what a customer would tell me, so. How experienced is your project organization? We're somewhat experienced. We've done a few. We did one upgrade. No project manager now, but we could get someone to do it in addition to some other work they're doing.
Yes.
I've been through this a few times, as you have as well.
Again, this is one of the things. If you're doing a complex, large deployment, make sure that you have a dedicated project manager. It's just a must thing. So again, basically, it's like you get, and then.
We have extensive experience.
So then let me actually show you. So again, this number in itself doesn't say that much, but if I can get this thing, so the easiest way actually to show this is just. So what we produce then is a report on the answers and kind of some recommendations. So the thinking here is, again, with this model, so like if you have any custom solutions deployed, well, what's the remediation activities? Make sure that you identify them and the owners of the IP and whatnot.
And we've taken different stabs at this. Some of the remediation, we actually included links to articles. So like links to TechNet documentation, links to things that were relevant. We've pulled that out. We're not sure if we're going to put that back in, but we want it to be actionable, right? So if you got something that was causing you to tip into red, we wanted you to actually have something you can do about it, as opposed to, well, you need to think about fixing this.
Yes. And then you can see that for certain categories, there's a low risk. So again, the proficiency, like there's no risk because the customer claims that they are proficient. And kind of the IT organization risk is low because it's like it's driven by business. Again, the risk index would be higher if it's IT driven, because quite often if it's IT driven, IT is constrained by the budget that they're given by business. But business still asks for everything, and IT has to say no. So,
yeah, as many of you know in the room, IT often gets put in a really difficult situation. We've got to do this, but you've got one resource to do it in 2 weeks, right?
So
this kind of helps back up that argument from the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me actually jump back to
the big red button.
The big red button. No, not that big red button. What's the clock ticking down?
Just push this.
So, and then.
Got it.
So again, what did you see? So again, this is a Windows 8 app driven by an assessment question framework. So behind the scenes, what's driving all of this is just like we have a set of questions, and each question has the possible answers. Each of these answers have a numeric weighting. So we then just sort of do calculation based on these, and we get this kind of combined risk assessment score. Again, this is not the absolute truth. What this is an approach where we're trying to sort of have the similar, we're sort of trying to bake the know-how from our field people who've done these so that we can early identify the potential risks. Again, this is not the absolute truth. These are just sort of risk indicators. So, and the whole idea here is that we can extend it if we want to. So like if you would need something like this for a customer that works in, let's say, the financial industry, we could add a new section on that are relevant for their line of businesses. So with the tool, like these are the 6 categories that we actually explore. And as you can see, like some of them are technical, but most of these are people and process types. So because what we've seen, especially with larger, more complex customers, it's the people and process part that actually comes back and haunts us. So I'll just quickly go through some of these examples to sort of illustrate why do we care about these things. So again, the question, who manages the environment? Again, if you're doing a cloud deployment with Microsoft, we assume that you have the full control of your environment, that you can run tools, you can do configuration changes in your environment. So most often, if you ask the customers, they say that they can do, and if they manage their own environment, they do have the rights to do that. But where we've seen issues is if this is an outsourced deal, and let's say that where we've seen this to be a particular problem has been in sort of deals where the customer has outsourced their email messaging to a certain service provider. And if the customer moves their email workload to the cloud, there's no business left for the service provider. So you can imagine how interested are they in helping in that project. So that's why one of the things we want to sort of assess quickly.
And the expertise question that we asked earlier about SharePoint, it's actually really important for all these dependent pieces, right? So I'm doing a pretty large private hosted cloud environment right now with a big professional services firm. And they've not traditionally been a big Microsoft shop, right? So the SharePoint folks know SharePoint pretty well. But the folks that I have for SQL Server and for AD, they're not traditionally AD people, they're identity people. So kind of bridging that gap and saying, okay, we have expertise in SharePoint, but not necessarily in Active Directory or not necessarily in Windows Server. You know, being able to flesh out those risks, I would say, is really important.
Yeah, well, I've seen this, especially customers coming from Domino, because they usually use Domino Directory as their corporate directory. Moving to AD, their AD data quality is typically suboptimal. So
I'll do the clicks for you.
So we'll go quickly through this. So again, like, why do we care about this? And again, at the end of the day, like, these are kind of the risks that we try to identify, and then the severity of those risks. So again, if you need to do a migration where you have to have access to the physical servers in order to run that, and you don't have access, obviously that is a high risk part for the project.
And I'm just going to go through these.
Yeah, let's go quickly through this. So again, we mentioned this, so organization, who drives this? Again, if it's IT driven, it's not a red, but it's not a green. If it's business driven, these typically would be green because, again, business usually can fund this. So, and technical, these are some of the things that we assess there, the authentication model.
There's a quite good demo at the end Kimmo's doing, so I'm trying to actually get through this so you can do that demo.
And you'll get the slides, but again, this one, again, so
go after
I'm not sort of dissing the devs, but the devs, there's nothing wrong with writing code to extend SharePoint, as long as you know what you do and as long as you're future-proofing your solutions. So again, it's not an easy thing to do, but it's not an impossible thing to do either.
And here we go.
Let's skip the question framework for now and go to the technical pieces, because that's kind of one thing that I've also seen with a lot of my customers when we're talking about, especially migrating to the cloud, is having a proper content and application assessment done on their environment so that we can base the decision on facts rather than on opinions and thoughts. So again, doing a content, so these are typically the 6 things we assess in these. So again, content volume, authentication, the health of the environment, customizations, usage of service applications, and then integration points. The content volume one is really, really, really crucial, especially if you're thinking about migrating to the cloud. Why is that? Because the more content you have, the longer it'll take to move them to the cloud. Because again, if you're doing an on-premises upgrade, you do a database attach, SQL just quickly processes that, but if you're moving, if you're moving, let's say, 1 terabyte of content to the cloud, and you get a throughput of, let's say, I don't know, 1 gig per hour, that'll take 1,000 hours just to move the data.
And this is usually where people will kind of hit the brakes and say, 1 gig an hour, I've got a huge network on my side, I've got a big open pipe. Let's think, you know, can I double that? Can I have 100 gigs an hour? And so.
Yeah, so this is one of the things where my approach always is, again, we have to sort of make a decision based on, like, what's the estimated average throughput, and then based on that, we know if you have X gigabytes of content, it'll take Y hours. And then because the consultancy company or whoever provides you those migration services, they will factor in their migration costs to sort of meet that duration criteria.
And I don't typically recommend proofs of concept just to do them, but to do a 2 or 3 day POC in your environment against your tenant, this is a good place to do it, because you can actually get those throughput numbers and then work backwards and get the overall time it'll take.
Exactly, because if tests show that we can reliably, let's say, move 5 gigs an hour, then suddenly you can move the 1 terabyte in 200 hours. So that has a huge significance, which you usually don't have to worry about on premises. The other area where we really need to pay attention is if you're moving to the cloud, because again, the customization model of the cloud is it's different from the on-premises environment. First of all, you can't do any full trust solutions. You can't do things like feature staplers. You can't do things like that. So, and also, you have to sort of go back and revisit your requirements and kind of the implementation plans. So like, who created that customization? Like, does the provider of that component have a migration path if you're moving to the cloud, or do they have a migration path or upgrade path if you're moving to the next version?
Yeah, and even why are we doing it? So I've dealt with a couple customers, and Miriam, you'd find this interesting, that were 2007, and they built their own managed metadata solution, right? So every time a new list item got added or updated, they went out and did their own terms, they did their own policies, they did it all. They've not moved to 2010, now they want to get to 2013, whether it's cloud or not. It's a lot of managed code, and we've got features in the product now that'll do that. So, you know, do they actually just stick with what they have? Do they don't? It's a big question to address.
Yes, and this is also one of the reasons why it's crucial to have business involved, because it's typically business that orders these customizations to their environments, and they just tell IT, make it happen. So again, if you're moving to the cloud, it might be hard to make it happen in the cloud in the same way.
Do you want to go to your...
No, let's
okay.
Because this is the last session, hey, so no one is kicking us out.
Oh, that's right, we're 5 hours. That's right.
Yeah, we're 5 hours, so it's good.
So we'll do like a break for coffee and come back?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, so coming back, so the IP thing, so do we have the IP, do we have the customization rights, do we have the code available if we need to look at what it's done? If we don't have, so luckily with SharePoint, well, customizations are managed code, so you could reflect and try to figure out how the code was written. So technically, you could make the argument that you always have the source code available. But again, the interesting thing here would be to see, so what is it that you're trying to do? So to James's point, so if you had your custom term store solution, like what would it take to move that to the out-of-the-box term store solution? And another thing is, if you're not sort of moving all of your sort of properties to the cloud, or if you're not upgrading all your properties, so what if you have customizations that are being used by, let's say they're being used by this web application and you're thinking about upgrading that web application. That's a bad example. They're used in these both farms, so do you want to branch them to have a separate tree for your 2010 or 2013 customization or whatnot? So again, there's nothing wrong in writing code and extending SharePoint that way, but you have to have all the processes in place to sort of be able to do professional development like code branching and all those things. So this one, we talked quickly about that. So again, in the future, like the reason why we're going claims is because we realized that the old kind of classic Windows authentication model has the limits. It only works effectively within the corporates of your corporate forests. So you have to have forest trusts and whatnot. So in the modern social connected world, the corporate boundaries are too tight. So that's why the claims approach allows us to sort of scale beyond the forest boundaries. So the questions here is, if you're doing this, so when do you do your upgrade? So do you do your classic to web apps, the classic to claims conversion on 2010, or do you migrate to 2013 to a classic mode web application and then do that switch, or whatnot? So again,
these are the two pivot points that we most often work through with our customers, and you'll see our guidance on both, and I'm sure on Wednesday they'll address both. But do you do the upgrade and the change after, right? So you change your authentication after you do it, and then try to work out any kinks or issues you run into then? Do you do it all in an environment you consider stable and actually get it working there in 2010 and get claims set up and working? Really depends on the situation, and I think they'll talk more about it on Wednesday. If it's pretty complex and you're doing a lot of stuff with external systems, it's probably better to do it in 2010 to make sure it's working as is. If it's straightforward and you can move it and you've got reasons to go to 2013, you can test that in the lab.
And the third one here is, if you're moving to, let's say, Office 365, your identities change. So it's no longer your domain backslash. Your identities, so you're using your UPN, but then so it's a claims-based user with the SPN part of it.
I think that icon on the bottom left is the funniest one in the whole deck, by the way.
So again, health. So what we've seen in many of the upgrade cases, so if we have broken databases that are broken in the sense that they have artifacts that don't work. So, but if you're never sort of hitting those URLs, you don't see those issues in your existing environment. But when you're moving them to the new environment, you might see them. So again, recommendations as part of your sort of organizational, operational service management, run test SP content database every now and then on your databases because it's an efficient way to sort of identify orphans and things like that. Another one, which is a new improvement that we have in 2013, is we can run test SP content database to identify if we were using wide lists. So that means lists with more than 8 lookup columns. So the test SP content database will give a list of those lists that are too wide. And another one, which is my favorite, is actually you can run test SP content database from your 2013 environment and pointing that back to the 2010 environment. So you run that from a vanilla 2013 environment against the 2010 databases, and then you'll identify all the customizations that are referred to in the databases. So again, easy ways to sort of figure out some of the things that if your databases are broken, if they have some other issues.
Yeah, and also just check the patch level as well.
Yes. So then service applications, again, some other things, especially if you're thinking about moving to the cloud. So again, looking at things from so if your sites are using external content types, if you're using, have Excel web parts, sort of a presenting line of business information. So again, depending on where they are defined, you need to figure out what's the right migration path or upgrade path.
Or does it just make sense to recreate the settings, right? To duplicate the settings, or I think we say replicate the settings.
So this, like the last Jeremy's point, so that's why I usually for my customers who are thinking about upgrade and search, I usually say it's probably easier to recreate the new environment and configure it rather than trying to sort of figure out all the settings from your existing environment and then applying them in the new environment. One note here again, for service applications, we do in the cloud, we provide the term store, we provide UPA, we provide like BCS, actually a handful of service applications. We don't have any easy way of moving service application data to Office 365. So there are WCF endpoints to get some service data, but typically those things, again, you need to consider, is it really worth it or not? The integration points, so again, if you have dependencies, so your BCS is talking to a line of business system, you have solutions that are creating terms in your term store, some external solutions, so if you're considering of moving them.
You almost went through the floor there. I think there's a trap door here.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
we're out of time.
We're out of time, but we do have the demo. So if you have to leave, you have a commitment, no worries. If you want to stick around for the next 4 hours, 5 minutes.
No. So again, like this 1 hour session is typically a 1-day workshop. So we try to squeeze it there because like the organizational the thing that I found that we consume most when we're doing the organizational assessment is coffee because it takes a long time to figure those things out. So the technical pieces tend to be easy, but then the people and process, because again, when you walk in and have that, it's almost certain that the customer will always say, yes, we're proficient, yes, we have the resources, but then when you ask them, so will you dedicate a technical resource to this project? No, he'll do it on top of his day job. So.
And we, we're, like I said earlier, we're Microsoft employees, and we go through the same things internally when we do internal projects. So we're up here talking about this, but the same hygiene, the same, trying to be really predictive and trying to be really focused, we really have to push that for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'm currently helping our internal IT to do a similar type of assessment for our internal SharePoint deployments to see which of them we could actually move to the cloud. So it's actually quite an interesting exercise because you can imagine that we have a bunch of SharePoints in Microsoft. But the good...
We love all of our SharePoints equally.
Yes. So the good thing is that most of them are managed in such a way that it's really hard for anyone except IT to extend them. So we have a pretty good understanding on customizations and whatnot. So we are out of time, so if you want to leave, you can leave. So the thing that I'll do next is, I've been actually working on a set of, so as I said, I've been working with Office 365 for years now, and one of the benefits we have with Office 365, especially with Exchange, is that we can, to our Exchange customers or to our customers, we can tell them, we can migrate your messaging environment to the cloud, and the cost will be X dollars per mailbox. So what I'm trying to create and do is kind of a similar migration factory approach, tool agnostic, so if the customer is using some of our vendor tools, it's fine, but a process where we would do kind of the assessment, so, and then do the full sort of analysis and then do deployments. And what I have to say here is, because of the internet connectivity earlier today, so I tested all of these things last weekend at home against the cloud. I didn't test it against on-prem, so I was sort of rewriting my commandlets 2 hours ago just to make sure that it works without internet. But let's actually quickly go through these things.
This is where Kimmo would usually say it was partly cloudy earlier today.
So let me show you what I have here. So again, no, you shouldn't see that yet. So this is running on my local box.
So the scenario here is you have an on-premises SharePoint site?
So a beautiful on-premise SharePoint site with just some documents and whatnot.
And you're looking to migrate this to?
Yes, to Office 365. So what I've written are a set of PowerShell commandlets that we can use to meet this goal. So first thing that we need to check for, again, in an environment like this is, we touched upon this, so it's customizations. So figuring out if our source environment has any unsupported customizations. So I have a get SPO. And then
Get SPO unsupported features, and then you pass the support URL, or the source URL.
Yeah. And
then you get a return
the screen resolution, I'm sorry about that, let me just, let me cheat. Saves me for some typing. There's my notepad, scripts.
This is a product called Notepad. Quite handy.
And it
You guys
does
are troopers
copy
for
and
staying with us.
it does copy and
It
PowerShell also does
copy
paste.
and paste now.
Yeah, it improves my productivity using.
How much would you pay?
So again, prototype from this weekend. So in this case, like if there would have been any features not supported, you would get a list of feature IDs and whatnot. And then I have a counterpart for that one, which is remove, which you could then remotely specify this target site collection and and then the feature ID, and then if it's site or web scoped. This will give us some nice red colors because this is not a URI. Anyway, so again, the thinking is for doing a kind of factory type of migration to the cloud, we need to do pre-flight checks to figure out, so what features do we have on premises that we need to remediate when we're moving to the cloud? That's one thing that we need to do. The other thing that we need to do is, we touched upon this briefly, but again, the users in the cloud are not domain users. So in Office 365, in order for you to be able to use SharePoint, you need to have a SharePoint license assigned to your users. So I have a similar one that checks the users, and let me actually do it there. And it checks the users from your on-premises environment, and then it asks the web service in Office 365 to see if those users exist or not. Let me just do the PowerShell one first. And then and we'll see that we have some users on my on-premises environment that don't resolve to the cloud. So again, like system account or whatnot, or the local service. So these are these are kind of the boring tools, but the fun thing is actually when we do this. So let me actually do a migration of a site collection from my on-premises environment to the cloud. So
this is actually going to go and pull, and what API are you using to do this?
So I'm using so there's nothing deployed on the server, so I'm just using the APIs we have in the product to sort of get information from SharePoint. I store it locally, I sort of do the user mapping, then I upload them to the cloud and deploy them.
So the content will end up in the O365 site with the appropriate users mapped?
Yes. If I just remember, if I specify the right URI. So typically what I've seen, so this is kind of a prototype. So the thinking here is that since it's scriptable, we can then start to do processing of larger chunks of data and just sort of doing them a step at a time, and then have a sort of offshore resources to run the migrations for us. So now we're waiting for the cloud to finish. Oh, that's intentional.
So it worked perfectly?
So this is, the reason why I get this is I do multi-threaded, and in PowerShell you can't from a separate thread write any objects out to the screen. So this was actually intentional. So this demo will either work or fail, like they all do. So again, I was able to grab the data from my environment. I'm processing the users. I'm creating my packages, and then I'm uploading them to the cloud, and then I'm initiating the import. Again, the same thing here because I'm calling this from another thread. So within 4 minutes, we should have, ooh. It's not empty, so yeah, so my bad, sorry. So let me just, where's my target site?
Has anyone been through a migration to O365? Like where you've actually pulled content from on-premises to it? Has anyone done anything with a connected O365 to on-premises? Looks like one. Anyone running O365 at all? A few. How many are 2010 on-prem? How many are 2007? We did this earlier. Anyone go to 2013 with an upgrade? Anyone go 2013 greenfield, like brand new implementation? That's the easiest upgrade, that's for sure.
So the reason why it failed was because I'm actually importing this to a site that already I tested just an hour ago, I think. Let me just verify that. Yes. So that site, so.
So should we, what do you think, Kimmo? You gonna keep going at it?
Yeah.
So if you've got to go, thank you for coming. We're going to keep plugging away here. Because I've seen this work about 5 times today, both O365 as well as on-prem.
So let me just.
I think the one person that's left, that's remaining, has to clap really loud when we're done for Kimmo.
Yeah, the problem is, like, normally I have like 1920 screen resolution so I can see what I type. This time I can't, so I'm just typing in blind, hoping. Oh, no, come on. is not my day.
Good being the last session.
Yes. Well, the thing is, I have no one else to blame except me because I wrote the damn thing, so. No pressures.
All right,
This
drum
time
roll.
it will work, or
I think I'm gonna be
anyway,
drum
so
rolling for
like
a
the
while.
thinking that we have with this is that we're planning to do some prototypes on kind of this migration factory approach so that we could offer this first thing like next fiscal year to our customers who are considering moving SharePoint content to the cloud. So,
Concept makes sense.
so let me show you what the site would have looked like so you can choose to believe it or not. But
Here's one we made earlier.
yes, so this one was the one that I just run before the session. So at the end of the day, what we'll get here is just a site collection like any, and then the key thing here is, again, we were able to retain kind of the user information, the look and feel. So it actually takes a clone of the site and just replace that against the other environment. So, but again, of course, this would fall into the category of smoke and mirrors, so let's hope that this guy.
And I think there's some important principles there in terms of whether you use a vendor product, you roll your own, you use something we do, you make sure it meets some of those,
Yes.
it brings the metadata, everyone knows that, but the mapping of the users, I think, is one of the big ones, right, Kimmo? And then
Yeah.
performance on top of that.
Yeah, with any tool, again, you should make sure that the tool meets your requirements, and it gives you the performance that you're looking for, and also that you have the right process, because again, a tool alone will not migrate your environment. You'll have to have a set of, come on. Yeah, beer.
I actually rode, that's a great segue. There's a town in southwest England called Beer. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, Beer. I was here last week down by Devon. I was outside Lyme Regis. I was riding a bicycle. I was about 30 miles into a bicycle ride, and it was go left to some town or right to Beer. And it was pretty easy. I just kind of turned right.
Okay, I'll give it one more shot, and then I'll
I was
give
a little
myself
surprised there
couple
wasn't like a
shots.
central fountain with beer flowing out of it or anything like that.
So,
Normal village. So is this third time's a charm, or is
yes.
this? Yep.
Oh, come on. Yeah, the problem is, so I'm just porting my code into PowerShell, so I still do some logging to the file system, and PowerShell keeps a lock on that file if it crashes. So that's the reason why we get this annoying error. But again, this was done. If this does not work, then
They're going to start IMing from the audience.
yes.
Kimmo.
So another thing that it actually does is it actually goes and it picks up from where it crashed. So the reason is we all know that internet is not reliable. So the way I wrote this tool was by having a way to say that if it crashes, you just rerun it and it'll pick up from where it left, which is really, really important if you're doing large-scale migrations of hundreds of sites. You don't want to sort of go back and do them one by one.
Like a synchronous atomic transaction. Yeah.
And so you kind of see then these different phases that it's going through, and then in a short while, it started the import, and within a minute or two, we should get another one saying that the import was success. And do you believe me? Nothing.
It's got a stuttering here. It says starting.
Yeah, starting.
I think you're taxing the system.
Question?
Yeah, where's this tool store? It's in
So it persists the state on the file system, on the migration machine. So you can't sort of, you have to resume it on the same machine.
So what, in a text file?
Yes. So that was the most elegant, simple. Well, actually, the text file, it sounds silly, but that's the most efficient way, because then if I need to tweak it, I just open it in Notepad, my favorite editor, so do things. So, and now if we go to that site.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. You select few. You brave few who've remained with us.
Well, actually, we could do it this way. So, if I go here, timeout. And here is James and
It did it. You got to give it to Kimmo. Persistent.
yeah, and again, this is still very much a prototype. So I didn't know how to write commandlets 2 weeks ago. I still don't really know how to do all of the fancy stuff. But it's actually, it's been a really interesting journey, sort of building these things to figure out a way. And my ultimate goal again here is, as I said, I want Microsoft to be able to offer a kind of a rate card-based migration of SharePoint content into the cloud. And kind of this is kind of one of the thinking in providing these kind of tools that can be used by then a service team to do those things. So, and again, the process that we're creating is, it's not tied to one particular tool set. So if you're using AvePoint, Metalogix, Quest, whomever, again, the process is tool agnostic, because like we said earlier, so there's a plethora of good tools out there. You just have to choose the right tool for your scenario. So with that, now I need a beer, I think.
I think so. Thanks, Kimmo. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.